We have a lot to cover tonight, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll begin with the introductions, and then that way, as people continue to join us in the next few minutes, they won't be missing too much. So welcome everyone to Phi Alpha Delta's May Speaker Series of Sound Mind, Mental Health and Success from Pre-Law to the Practice of Law. We will be reserving a few minutes at the end for Q&A, so feel free to ask any questions on the Q&A chat screen. But feel free to send those questions throughout the session. I will be monitoring them. We would love to hear your questions. No question is too trivial. Lord knows even I want to ask our speakers' thoughts on the Murdaugh murders. But with that, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming our speakers, Jolene Blackburn and Daryl Singer. I'll be posting links to their websites in the chat as well. Jolene is a virtual estate planning attorney who helps prospective law students save time, money, and stress on their legal journey. Over her career, she has earned the nickname Trial Queen, has taken a case to the California Supreme Court, and is a best-selling author. Daryl is joining us from Canada, where he is the head of commercial and civil litigation, as well as co-chair of class actions and mass torts at Canada's largest personal injury firm, Diamond & Diamond. He's practiced for 30 years, with the exception of the year he took off to recover from his addiction. He is now committed to writing and speaking about overcoming addiction and mental health issues, as well as being part of the Law Society of Ontario's Members Assistance Program. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
So we'd like to start off with both of you sharing your story with us. First, Jolene, then Daryl.
Sure. So I'm from California, LA. I was the first female in my family to go to college. So, when I said I want to go to law school, all the pressure went right on there. Just stick with the program and make sure you go to law school. I fought every single thing in law school, didn't want to do anything they told me to do, which ended up resulting actually in a lot of good things for me, but took the bar. I've always stayed here in LA. I've practiced in two areas of law, workers' comp and estate planning. I definitely had some ups and downs throughout that journey as far as just trying to stick to my dream and not quite seeing it at first and trying to work hard towards coming all the way back around to it. I started out in estate planning and just could not make ends meet and finally had to give in for the paycheck. Luckily, I ended up loving work comp, but did face burnout. And so then was able to come back to estate planning and make it work for me the second time around. And so I've been doing that for the last handful of years. I started helping law students and pre-law students when I was in law school. I just noticed that everyone seemed to have the same questions, the same doubts, the wanting to drop out or the overwhelm or just all the questions. And so I just started actually advising them as far as I could. And over the years have gathered a lot of information to help them hopefully reduce some of that stress, because once you graduate, it doesn't get any better. So I have two kids and they are both special needs. So that adds an additional pressure to my career path. And I also have two dogs.
Thank you for that. Daryl?
So my story was a great story until somewhere in the mid 2000s. I was called to the bar here in the province of Ontario in 1993. I was 25 years old at the time. I was fairly young. A lot of my contemporaries were several years older than me. We had a process in Ontario, in Canada at the time, where you could get into law school if your marks and your LSAT were high enough after only 2 years of undergraduate. So I went straight from high school to undergraduate, did my 2 years, got into law school, went to what was considered to be the best law school in Canada, it still is in my opinion. I was good at Hall Law School, and came out and started work. And in my first job, I sat in an office with one of my mentors who was probably in his early 40s at that time, and I really looked up to this guy for the first 6 months because I just thought that he was, everything that a lawyer was supposed to be. And one day I went looking for him for lunch, and the next day and the next day, and I discovered that he was always gone around lunchtime. And one day I asked him about it, and he confided in me that in fact he was going out to AA meetings at those lunch breaks. And he then proceeded to tell me that in fact, although he'd been at that firm for 15 years, he'd only just come back to the firm the year before I started because he had flamed out. He had been a raging alcoholic, and he lost all his money and his wife, and basically the firm said they would throw him out if he didn't go and dry out. And I remember, with all this sort of vim and vigor of a 25-year-old right out of the best law school in Canada, thinking like I have the world by the balls. I just remember thinking, this guy's sad. I'm never going to be like this guy. This is the saddest story I've ever heard. Like, how does that happen to you? And 15 years later, I was that guy. It wasn't alcohol, it was drugs, but I was that guy. I rose very, very quickly. I worked at that firm for all of a year, started my own practice, struggled a little, but managed to then bring my practice into a firm. And I worked in a firm for the first 10 years of my practice that was really, it was a firm of 12 lawyers, and I became a partner there, but it was really an amalgam of 12 sole practitioners sharing space and expenses. So I built my own practice in a mix of family, criminal, commercial litigation, anything that would get me into court on a regular basis. But I did very well very early on. I was financially successful, but quite frankly, I was not happy. I had an unhappy marriage, got divorced, got remarried. That became an unhappy marriage. Ultimately, I ended up going in-house to work for my largest client as the VP and general counsel. That turned out to be a big mistake. And around that time, my second marriage was falling apart. I had young twins. I had an older son. And because I've suffered from migraines my entire life, I had easy access to prescription for things like OxyContin. And the doctors at that time, and I don't know, anybody who maybe practiced injury law back in 20 some odd years ago may remember that there was a short-lived thought process amongst pain management physicians that we should give you the OxyContin, not just, and this was of course as a result of the approach of the Sackler family in the US as well in marketing that drug. But this idea that we should give people OxyContin, not just for breakthrough pain, but if you have chronic pain, we'll give it to you prophylactically. And of course, it doesn't take very long when you're taking that drug every day for your body to become acclimatized to require more and more and more. And then you factor in that my marriage is falling apart. I'm in a miserable in-house position, although to the outside world, it looked like I had it all, right? I had a big house in the suburbs. I was married. Nice. My wife is a chiropractor. We had beautiful young children. I had this job that was the envy, literally, of all my friends in private practice. It was like, oh, you've hit the jackpot, man. You must be so happy. But inside, I was miserable, and I started to get more access to those drugs. I we talk about double doctoring. I went to 6 doctors and 7 pharmacies. I never put anything through my health plan so that nobody would catch me. I went so far as to sit in doctors' offices to get a prescription and steal prescription pads and forge prescriptions, and became a raging narcotic addict and didn't believe that I had a problem. I thought I was a functioning addict, but of course, there's no such thing. And it all came crashing down at some point, somewhere around 2008 when I was, by that point, I'd left my in-house job. I was back in private practice as a sole practitioner, and I wasn't showing up. My assistant didn't know where to find me. I wasn't answering my phone. I wasn't returning anybody's calls, anybody's emails. Clients started to report me to our regulator here in Ontario, the Law Society of Ontario. They started to look for me. I wasn't responding to them. And I literally couldn't get out of bed in the morning. And at some point, I reached for help. And we have a very good program here called the what was then called the Ontario Lawyers Assistance Program. It's now called the Members Assistance Program. And I went there and sought help. And they basically, the fellow who was the intake social worker, the lawyer social worker, and said to me, you need to, this would have been somewhere around the end of 2008. He said, you need to close your practice and devote yourself to recovery full time. And I said, I can't do that because I have young kids. I just got divorced. I've got child support. I got to pay the bills. And he said, well, that's fine, but then you're going to die. Just like that, you're going to die. And I looked at him and he said, I've seen it before. I could give you the list of lawyers that have died because they didn't put their health first. And ultimately, I trusted him, closed my practice in 2009. And that was my full-time job for a year, was recovery. I came back to practice in 2010. It's now over 13 years that I'm clean. And one of the remarkable things that comes out of that clarity of going through addiction and recovery is you actually learn, we'll talk more about this as the evening goes on, you learn more about what really is important in your life and what really makes you happy. And I realized that so much of my, what led me to addiction was just I wasn't happy as a person. And now I have this fantastic life. And that's why I've spoken all over Canada about this. This is my first time in the US talking about it, but this is why I do this, is to say to people, like, you got to get help, because when you get to the other side, your life is going to be really great. And it's much better than, and I have lost a number of friends along the way to addiction. So I'm certainly happy to be here.
Well, I am so glad to have both of your unique perspectives on these topics tonight. Oh, to start out, I think all of us here know that there is a very serious addiction and mental health crisis in the legal profession at this point. Nobody disputes that. What I want to know is a few things. Why is that? And then as a follow-up, do you think that the legal profession actually creates those addiction and mental health issues? Or is it more that those of us who may have such issues are just drawn to this profession in larger numbers? Either of you can go first, but I would also love to hear the difference between what the two of you see in lawyers and with those who are students or who are not yet lawyers.
Yeah. You want to go or you want me to go, Daryl?
No, you go right ahead.
Okay. I would say, first of all, a lot of us do have that type A personality. So we're almost like predestined to overdo things. We're overachievers. We don't like to admit failure. So I think a lot of us have in our own personalities that little bit of recipe for failure in a profession that demands perfection. Anytime we mess up, it could be a major malpractice case. It could be life or death for somebody. There's a lot on the line, no matter which area of law you go into. So it can be dramatic. It can be something that's really hard for us to accept when we lose a case or something or didn't get that best settlement, that these people are walking away with less than what maybe we feel inside they should have walked away with. So there's a lot on the line, both in the profession as well as in ourselves. I think also one of the major contributions to the mental health crisis for lawyers is the debt load that a lot of the attorneys have. Students are not warned well enough as to what that debt means, what those numbers mean. I have students constantly comparing, okay, a $10,000 a year loan versus a $30,000 a year loan, let's say. They don't realize that's not 10 versus 30, it's, times 3. So you've got, 30,000 versus, 90,000, right? But then you have the interest on top of that, which on average is equal to about 50%. It just depends on the numbers and all that, but it averages out to about 50%. So these people are taking out tens and tens of thousands more in student loans than they actually realize. And then they're stuck in these jobs that they don't want to do. They don't feel like there's an escape plan. It's very difficult to become a non-lawyer after you've been a lawyer, because a lot of people think, well, you're just in between right now. You're going to leave us as soon as you get a better offering. So then you feel even more stuck. We kind of have this spiral that a lot of people get stuck in, and they don't realize you can take a few gap years. and you can maybe explore some other career paths first and build on your resume, maybe even build on that scholarship track, and then go to law school and maybe look even better for internships, be more secure in your path. But so I think it's definitely a mix. And I mean, there's several other factors. There's all along the way, all this shoulds. You should do this, you should do that, you should get on law review, you should do the moot court. Even though you're not interested in those things, you should, so you feel like you have to. And your first summer internship leads to the best second summer internship, leads to that job offer. And so you can't just go enjoy your summer. And I mean, for me, I encourage students all the time, if you're not happy, take note and do something about it. I spent my first summer playing with third graders. My school had a little program. They paid us a few bucks to go to the local impacted school. And I was so burnt out after 1 year. I just said, no, I'm not doing anything legal. And then the second summer, when I'm supposed to be doing this amazing thing, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I did have an internship that I loved, but I also went abroad. I spent half my summer abroad. And they say, oh, you can't do that second summer. I did it. It doesn't matter. It'll all work out in the end. Take a deep breath and realize that you don't have to be in this tunnel. We have tunnel vision. And it's because everyone's telling us if you don't do everything perfectly right, you're going to mess it all up. And it's going to be, you're not going to ever get a job. So it's a whole series on top of the fact that it's next to impossible to really know what a lawyer does until you're a lawyer. Even the internships don't really show you what we do. It's just this nice little fluffy version. And so you're paying all this money. And then at the end, you're like, wait, I don't even like this. So, you're kind of stuck. So there's multiple factors, in my opinion, that go into this.
Yeah, and I think Jolene's right. I think I would say it's a perfect storm, right? It's two things. It's number one, we are a certain self-selecting profession. I certainly not everybody that chooses to go into law is a type A, but I think it's fair to say, certainly when it comes to trial lawyers, the vast majority of us are. People that tend to be a type B or slacker personality aren't going to choose this profession, and if they do, they're not going to last very long, right? So it is self-selecting in that regard, and those people come with, if you're already a type A personality, you're a perfectionist, maybe you've got some elements of narcissism or worse, perhaps sociopathy, but certainly, you have something in you that drives you in this way to this weird profession instead of going and having a normal job like most people. And then you combine that with the pressures that come into this job, where your expectations from your clients, from your bosses, your partners, the expectations of people around you when you're young, when you're 25, 28, 30 years old and you're starting out and you're a lawyer and all your friends are not lawyers, there's an expectation, particularly in a big city. Like I live in Toronto, which is no different than living in LA or Chicago or New York in that sense. There's an expectation that, well, you're a lawyer. Why aren't you driving a Mercedes? Or, oh, you've been practicing 5 years. Why didn't you make partner yet? Or why don't you live in this neighborhood? Or why are you still renting an apartment instead of owning a house? Like there's all of these, as Jolene says, you should do this. You should be doing this. And so you combine that with the personality trait that's like, I'm a perfectionist. I've always been at the top of my class. I've always done everything I wanted. I always got what I wanted. And suddenly, like, you're not going to, I always say when you start law school, it's the first time it hits you in the face, right? Everybody that starts first year law school was the top of their class. They were whatever, valedictorian, class president, got a scholarship for a sport. Like they were the best of the best of the best at elementary and high school and university. And then you get into law school. Well, everybody was there, but now some of you are going to be B and C students, right? And so I remember the first time I got a C in one of my first courses in law school, and I had never seen a C on a paper in my life, ever. I barely ever saw a B in my life. And then here I was, like, I had made it to this elite school, and now they're telling me, well, you're not really that good. You're not as good as these other people. And that's where it starts. And it just gets worse and worse and worse because, you start at a small firm, but a friend of yours from class is at a national firm, right? And so there's all of these things. And it creates, as they say, this perfect storm. Before I leave the question, I'll share some statistics with you. Hazelden, which is a big, rehab facility in Minnesota, did a study on the legal profession, and some of the statistics in there were essentially like this. And I may be slightly off on the numbers, but because I just wrote them down from memory, I didn't go and look for the study, although I have it somewhere, and I can always send it along to Lindsey to circulate if you'd like me to do that. But 5% of people in society will have a major depressive episode at some point in their life, major depressive. 18% of people will have a serious mental health issue at some point in their life. And 5 to 8% of people will have a substance abuse and addiction issue. Now, those numbers are shocking, right? You think about that. That's society at large. That's not lawyers. Lawyers are 3 times the national average. So you take those numbers, 5 to 8% of the general population will have a substance abuse or addiction issue, and it's 3 times that within our profession. Terrifying. And we don't do enough about it. And more needs to be done. And these are the sorts of talks that need to be done. But ultimately, the large firms and the regulators are the ones that really need to be taking the lead. And I don't know what's going on in the US, but I can tell you in Canada, with the large firms and the regulators, there's a lot of this, a lot of talk, not a lot of action.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And, I hear some of the same things over and over in, the legal profession, doing legal malpractice and legal ethics work, but I've also heard it come up several times here already tonight. And that is the issue of these external issues at play, such as financial woes or marital problems. And what I'd love to hear is, how do those issues play into the larger problem of lawyer or legal, mental health and addiction problems? And then 2, it seems like it's a kind of a vicious cycle that would almost never end. And so how do you break that cycle?
Well, I'll go first because I'm on my 3rd marriage and hopefully last marriage, by the way. But my first 2 marriages were my first more so, but also my second, significantly impacted by this profession. It's very hard as a young person in your 20s and 30s to have a new marriage, have young children, and keep everything going at home when you're working 80 hours a week, when your focus is on your clients. And it's worse now. I mean, as bad as it was when I started practice, we didn't have email, right? I mean, in some ways it was worse because I would have to actually get up and drive to the office to do my work on a Sunday morning, as opposed to, now I could get up and open my computer and stay in bed and do it. But the point is, you're always on, you're always focused on your clients. And there's a fear, and it's a fear you've got to get rid of. I say this to young lawyers all the time. If your client can't understand that you're not accessible on Sunday morning because you're spending time with your kids, fuck that client, get another client. And it's easier said than done. I fire clients all the time now. I fire clients if I just don't like them. I fire clients who you want to argue about my retainer at the initial meeting, go somewhere else. I don't care. But I say it like it's easy because I've been doing this 30 years and thank God I have more work than I can handle. But certainly if I go back to when I was a young lawyer, it's a lot easier said than done. It is very difficult. You're worried about where is that next client coming from, right? Even if you're in a firm, obviously as a young lawyer, you need the senior people to feed you work. And if you're not accessible, maybe they're going to give it to another junior, right? If you're, as I was as a young lawyer, responsible to generate my own work, if I lost that client, that was a big deal. And so, I tell people, well, you got to focus on your own time, but it's difficult to do. And so that really makes it difficult in a marriage. And lawyers typically tend, for the most part, we tend to marry people that are also, if not lawyers, but certainly other highly educated people with significant careers who may have similar pressures. And so you take 2 of that and you put that in a house where you're married, you have kids, but you're both working insane hours, and it really impacts the ability to maintain a strong marriage.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I absolutely agree. But I think also our personalities change in law school. We are taught how to tear every sentence apart, how to analyze everything, how to fight for everything. And sometimes that's hard to turn off. Even if we tone it down at home, we're still doing it. You can't fully turn it off. And so the other side there, the husband, the wife, is not having fun with that, so it doesn't go over well. And you have to really be aware of what you're doing. And you have to have a significant other that will communicate that to you. Like, hey, I'm not, opposing counsel. You need to calm down a little bit. You need to stop tearing apart everything I say, or whatever that situation is. But we have to also reflect a lot on, we aren't acting in I don't want to use the word normal, but like a healthy relationship pattern. We also don't, set boundaries very well. So with clients and things like that. So really reading some self-help books is super helpful. For me, a lot of times at 5 o'clock, what I'll do is I will still be working and I will still be writing emails to clients, but I will hit the send later. And so the emails go out at 8 a.m. So my clients never know that I'm working after 5 p.m. That way they don't get the expectation that if they email me at 5 p.m. that I'm actually going to respond. I try to just make sure that only maybe in an emergency situation, like we have trial tomorrow or something like that, then I'm available. But I try to set those boundaries, even if the other side, my client, whoever, doesn't know I'm setting those boundaries. In my mind, it makes me feel better about I'm not on all the time, even though maybe I am working till 7 p.m. or whatever time. But it's very true. When my kids were little, and especially, I think this was part of that was before laptops, when you had to go into the office to work. And part of it was when laptops came out. I would come home, I do the dinner thing, I put the kids to bed, and then I would work for a few more hours. And it's just, it's almost never ending. It's just a cycle. And before laptops, I would take my little toddler into the office, close my door so she could just walk around while I just did a little bit of work. And it's like, that's just not healthy. We're not very healthy people.
Jolene, do you see some of those same characteristics as a lawyer in either law students or pre-law students that you work with?
Yes, a lot of them. First of all, sometimes when I'm just, looking at things like their resume, right? And they're overkilling, they're doing so much, right? And I know that they feel like they need to do all these things to have that good resume, to have that good application. And they're right. But I also wonder if they're realizing that they're not setting boundaries at all, right? They're 24/7 on. They have all these internships. They're working part-time and they have an internship and they're volunteering for something and they're, a president of blah, blah, blah. And they're just doing all these things. And yes, I get it. You got to be competitive to the next person. But just keep in mind, if that's not making you happy, there's a place for you out there somewhere, even if you take half that stuff off your plate. Because we are horrible at saying no, at slowing down. And take that, I don't know, gymnastics class in college or whatever it is, go have a little fun. But I talk to a lot of students who are very unhappy. We have here in the US, I don't think you guys have it in Canada, but like a 3+3 program where you can graduate from college and law school all within 6 years. So you cut off a little bit of time, but you're not living life. You're not enjoying college. You're studying all the time. And I was talking with a student who said, kind of at the last minute, she just stopped and said, I just want to enjoy myself a little bit. I want to have a life. I want to have a college life. And I was like, good for you. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to have a life. It's okay to just relax a little bit.
Yeah, I think that is good advice. So I think it's safe to say that setting boundaries is part of the process of getting help. I don't think there's any question about that. What I'd like to know is, Daryl, especially you, at what point did you decide to get help? Was there a turning point for you? And then how have you seen that same experience carry over into other lawyers that you've met throughout the years speaking? And then Jolene, I'd love to hear your observations as well from working with students.
So for me, the turning point, and people ask me all the time when I do these talks, for how long was I like a serious hardcore addict? I don't actually know that answer. I think it was, I got help at the end of '08. I really started to dig deep and go into recovery at the beginning of '09. And I think I was a serious addict maybe from 2007. My ex-wife will probably tell you it started more like 2002 or 2003 because you don't know, right? You don't know. And then there's so much of a period of time, maybe in 2007, for example, that was just a blur. And that was, the '07 and '08, which were just so bad. And I think for me, the turning point was twofold. One is the letters from the Law Society started to pile up. And I realized that if I didn't deal with this issue, I was going to lose my license. And I think the second thing that happened was I thought I was going to lose my kids. I had an incident where I couldn't, I had tried to quit cold turkey. I hadn't gotten any help. I had literally just thrown away all my pills and tried to quit cold turkey and had all of the things that you have when you go through withdrawal. And I managed to go to a walk-in clinic. And of course, they wouldn't give me the OxyContin, but they gave me some sort of, I think it was lorazepam or something. And I basically almost overdosed on that. And I must have slept for like, I don't even know how long, but I overslept to the point that my aunt came and had to get my kids because my older son, who was 7 or 8 at that time, called and said, like, Daddy's not waking up. And when I finally woke up and like my kids weren't there, and I made a phone call to my ex-wife, and she's like, oh yeah, my auntie came and got the kids, and here's why. And I was like, okay, like she's not gonna let these kids ever come back to my house. Like, this is fucking crazy. Like, that was, for me, that was the turning point. And that was on a weekend, and it was that Monday morning that I made that phone call and I went and sought help. And yes, that was the turning point. But you have to hit rock bottom. One of the things I see with it wasn't the first time that I had made that call to the legal assistance program. There had been a couple other times, and it just sort of went in one ear and out the other. Or I'd try to do what they told me, and then I wouldn't do it because it was easier to keep going and not have to. Recovery is hard work. I feel like if you can beat an addiction, there is nothing in life that you can't face. That is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the hardest thing anybody will ever do, is getting clean and staying clean. Staying clean now is easy, but getting through that first year, that is insanely hard. And most people, quite frankly, the statistics seem to say that most people don't stay clean. That's the reality of it, right? So, so for me, that the turning point was essentially hitting rock bottom and realizing I was going to lose my kids, I was going to lose my license, and I was already at that point where I knew people were going to, people around me were not making it, and I was very, very, very lucky. I started to get clean at the beginning of 2009, 2010. In January, I went back to work. I was clean. I was healthy. Then discovered I had some skin cancer on my head. In August of 2010, or July of 2010, I had to go through surgery. And I came out of the surgery, and I had said going in, I'm barely, 6, 8 months, 10 months clean from narcotics. You can't give me anything. And that was 5 days of it. You come out of an operation and you can't take any narcotics. And so it was tough, but you have to sort of push through that. And but I was very lucky because in Canada, I don't know when it started in the US, but right around the end of 2010, beginning 2011 in Canada, that's when fentanyl started to hit. And I know, as an addict, if fentanyl had been around, if I hadn't been clean, if I had still been an addict when fentanyl hit, I would have punched those patches open and licked that stuff. If anyone knows fentanyl, it came in these patches, and you would punch the patch, and there was like a liquid inside. You were supposed to put the patch on, and it would release like over 12 hours or whatever. And what addicts were doing was, of course, like puncturing the little package and snorting it or swallowing it. I don't have any doubt that would have been me, and I would have been dead, because we've had a huge fentanyl crisis in this country as a result. So I am so thankful that they say timing is everything. So I was very lucky, and I've lost in the last 13 years an awful lot of friends to alcoholism, narcotics, fentanyl, suicide from depression. It's been so I'm really thankful. But you have to hit. I just say this: you have to hit rock bottom. You know, people tried to get me help. I had two groups of friends who tried to stage an intervention, and I looked them all in the eye and said, you know, you guys don't know what you're talking about. So addicts lie to everybody, but mostly addicts lie to themselves. So until you hit rock bottom as an addict and you accept that you need help, you might not get help.
Is
Yeah,
there
I
any,
think-
as a follow-up to that real quick, is there anything that you think that other lawyers can do to kind of speed up that realization process that they need help? Or is it literally just watching the addiction?
Lindsey, the only thing that you can do for a colleague is to say, I'm here. I know you're going through something. When you're ready to talk about it, I'm here. I'm a safe space. There's no judgment, and I'll help you get whatever help you need. My door is open. My phone is always on. That's all you can do. If you try, as my friends did, to sort of intervene, you're going to, not only will that person push you away, when they are ready for help, they're not going to come back to you. So all you can do is let them know in the most non-judgmental way possible, hey, I'm a safe space. When you're ready, I'm here.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry to interrupt you earlier, Jolene. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. I was just going to add that, you know, especially for law students, it's so important to be so careful and so aware of what you're doing, because you know, it's one thing to have something like, for example, a DUI as an attorney. It's a totally different matter to have that as a law student. It really can mess up your timeline. I know several people who have passed the bar exam, but cannot practice law because the bar has not allowed them to do so. They have to check so many boxes. And even if they've checked 20 boxes, it's still not enough. They make you jump through so many hoops. And it's 10 times harder to get where you should have been as a law student having those issues. So be very careful, be very mindful. If you feel like you have anything going on down that path, really seek out that help. I know here in the US, I'm a member of the Other Bar, which is an organization that's nationwide, and it's for anyone in the legal industry. So it doesn't matter, or related to the legal industry. So it could be a spouse of a lawyer, but mostly it's lawyers, judges, law students, and it's a little less formal than like AA or anything like that. There's less formalities to the meetings. I've attended Al-Anon, and they have, you get like 1 minute to speak or something, and billing every 6 minutes. Having that little buzzer go off every other minute was driving me crazy. I already lived my life by the clock. I didn't want to be told to shut up after a minute or two. I couldn't handle it. So the Other Bar is a little bit more casual. And what's great about it is it's all law-related people. So we understand the pressures. We have that similar personality type, most likely. In a sentence, you can say so much and everyone understands. If you say, I had to go to court and this happened, you don't have to explain what all that entails and what it means. Everyone understands. And so you're really kind of with your people. And again, it's a mix of whether it's a legal secretary, whether it's enablers, whether it's addicts of any sort.
And that's, I think, so that's nationwide and is open to anybody related to the law, correct? Not just lawyers or law students. Okay, fantastic. So you beat me to my next question, which was, what are the resources that are available to lawyers and to students as well? I think there's a slightly different question for both of you, which is, Jolene, you've already discussed the Other Bar. We did receive a question from an attendee asking about what is being done to provide support to law students facing some of these issues. And I would add to that what is being done also for pre-law students. And then for Daryl, I know you are a wealth of knowledge on resources. So if you could highlight some of those, and I think speaking about the lawyer assistance programs would be very helpful, because the majority of jurisdictions in the United States do have them as well.
Yeah, I'll just finish up then my thought and I'll let Darrell speak to the resources because I think he is definitely more the wealth of information on that. But yes, as far as law students and lawyers, there are some newer things that are out there. And this might just sound like a little off the beaten path, but there's a lot of TikToks and things like that just, it's a more casual environment where you can hear people's stories. People are sharing what's happened to them, their perfectionism, how to overcome their addiction or suicide attempts or things like that. And so people are being very open. You just have to find it. Now, as far as the schools, I'm not up on what all the different schools are doing, but I do know a lot of the students are really starting to create communities around, you got to follow this TikToker or this person on Instagram. And there are a lot more of these type of webinars and conventions talking about mental health. I know that some of the state bars are starting to say you can't ask certain questions because they want to make sure that there's no more stigma of mental health issues, because they know it's rampant in our industry. And so it shouldn't be made to be a very specific topic, right? It's just, we all have our issues. And I know when I was working corporate, lots of people took leaves of absence for mental health reasons, and it was not a big deal. I think it's getting out there. It's getting better. People are talking more about it. So it's becoming more acceptable, and people can accept it within themselves a little better. But again, it's hard because we are perfectionists. So it's just getting that message out to the students earlier. You can strive to be that perfectionist, but remember, you're not perfect. And it's okay to ask for help or take a step back or slow down. Yeah, you can take a semester off law school. It's okay.
So I think to pick up on something Jolene said, then I'll talk about the specific resources. I hadn't actually thought about the idea of following people on TikTok or Instagram, but I guess it's not much different than what Jolene and I are doing here by sharing our stories and perspectives. There's a real value. The most important thing for me, for example, when I contacted my members assistance program, was the first thing they did. I mean, they line you up with doctors and therapists and all kinds of addiction counselors, whatever you need. But the most important thing that they did, and the most important thing that certainly we still do in Ontario and most members assistance programs, as I understand it across North America do, is they match you up with what they call a peer mentor. So I'm now a peer mentor. And when I had a peer mentor, they matched me up with a guy that was actually younger than me, who was a partner in a fairly prominent firm. And he said to me in our first meeting, he said, I want you to know that I used to be a cocaine addict and I lost 2 years of my career because I couldn't function. And that was the most beautiful thing I heard at that time, because it suddenly made me realize, like, I'm not alone. Here was a guy that was a partner in a prominent Toronto firm and was, by all accounts, successful. And for him sharing that he had been through this and had recovered and was back where he should be, it suddenly made me realize that this was okay. It was going to be okay. Like, if he could do it, I can do it. And I bring that now as a peer, mentor to others when they call me, and I say, I tell them my story, and this is why I speak and I write. We have a lawyers newspapers here, and I write a monthly wellness column for one of the national legal publications. And people contact me all the time as a result and say, thank you for writing about this. It made me feel like I'm going to be okay. So I think, Jolene, you're right. Like, I think any way at all that you can get some semblance of understanding that you're not a bad person or you're not a failure because you may be going through depression or crippling anxiety or alcoholism or whatever the issue is that's preventing you from functioning the way you want to. But then there are the sort of formal resources, right? So every bar association in the U.S., I understand, has the same thing that we have in every province in Ontario, which is that some form of a members assistance program. Lots of firms, if you're in a large firm or a large corporation, you'll certainly have an EAP that's available to you. Most law schools now, I can't speak to the US, but certainly in Canada, more, I won't say most, but more and more law schools are starting to develop similar mentoring type programs within the law school where people are able to go and be open about their issues. And so those resources are there. And then, of course, there's always the more general resources, right? You can always go to a 12-step meeting of whatever kind you want. Don't worry about whether it matches your addiction. I had a drug addiction, but I started by going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. It doesn't really matter. The idea is just any sort of program. Lots of people choose to deal with it or get help through their faith. I am a remarkably, I always describe myself as an atheist Jew, but I will tell you that when I was going through my deepest, darkest time, one of the greatest comforts I had was a very, very orthodox rabbi who would just pop into my house every now and again, unannounced, just to make sure I was okay. And he would try to convince me to pray, which I didn't want to do. But the fact that this person, and so again, if you are a person of faith, don't be afraid to reach out to your clergy. That's what they're there for. They're actually, they're specially trained in this sort of thing. So your doctor, in Canada, we're very lucky because we have universal health care. So it's much easier to access that sort of help within the traditional healthcare system. But again, in the US, I assume if you're part of a firm or a large corporation, you're going to have access to healthcare. So there's lots of options out there. The thing that's most important about the members assistance programs is that they're confidential, right? That may not be the case. Certainly, again, if you seek out a faith leader, that'll be confidential. If you go through the traditional medical system, that may not be confidential, right? Those records may at some point, who knows, they could become public for various reasons. But certainly within the context of an EAP or a Bar Association Members Assistance Program, that process is entirely confidential. And so there's a certain comfort in being able to go there and know that you're not going to harm your career by seeking that help.
So what can law firms or employers be doing to help? So we're looking at this from another angle now.
Daryl, you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go quick. Yeah, I think law firms need to get on board with, I always say I'm part of a firm in Toronto now, that is really on board with it. There's nobody in my firm that could seek help where they wouldn't be told, go away and get the help you need. We're one of the few firms that actually pays our female lawyers their full salary while they're on maternity leave. So yay for my firm. And we're partly because we're led by a female managing partner. So that helps. When you have a law firm that's led by a 45-year-old woman, you're certainly going to have a different focus on what's important outside, both in and outside of law, than in a large national firm that's led by a group of 70-year-old white guys, right? So that's the reality of it. But I think that's what firms need to do. I think firms need to give over leadership to some of the younger people. I mean, younger people, people of diversity, women. I think that's really, really important, because I think by doing that, you'll bring all of these newer perspectives of people who don't subscribe to the old way. I hate to say it, but at 55, I'm the old white guy in my firm, right? And I came up at a time where it was just understood that you go to work, you don't ask questions, you don't question your boss, you work the 90 hours a week you're expected to work, and so it's really important, I think, that the firms the bring in a younger, more diverse group of people into the leadership. And over time, that's really where this profession is going to see the change. I don't think we're going to see change in a year or two, but I am optimistic that 20 years from now, we're going to see a significant amount, generation is going to be a huge change, because it's going to be a group of people that grew up with a different set of ideals than my generation.
Yeah, I think, Daryl, you're spot on. There's a lot of firms in fact, most firms, because they're kind of at least at a minimum forced to recognize things like mental health days or leaves of absence. But at the same time, they're expecting you to meet your billable hours, right? So yes, go ahead, take that time off. We understand. Oh, but wait, you didn't meet your billables for the month. It doesn't go together. And a lot of firms have not fully reconciled that. They haven't figured that out. I mean, when I went on maternity leave, yeah, I was given a raise at the end of the year, but at the same time, it was like, oh, not as much as you could have earned because, you didn't bring in as much this year. Well, yeah, because I was off for a few months, so it doesn't always match up. They are getting better. Again, the important thing is to recognize that there are options out there. That if the firm you're at sucks at this kind of stuff, there are firms that are awesome at this kind of stuff. You're not stuck. Don't stay where you're at. Don't stay at a place that doesn't match your ideals and what's important to you. If they don't understand work-life balance, or at least on some level, again, we all have jobs to do, but if they don't understand that at all, then that may not be the right place for you. And it's okay to recognize that not everyone needs to work at that firm. That just because, I had friends who they just want to be partners. Day one, they just want to be, I never really want to be a partner. I didn't care. We were on different tracks. They were working millions of hours. I was trying to find the job that paid well, and I didn't have to work long hours. There's different goals in life, and realize maybe that's not you. Maybe you don't need to do all those things, and you might be happier. I was asked to join management many times when I was working corporate, and many times I said no, because in my mind, that is glorified babysitting, and I do not want to do that. I have no interest in that. I know my happy place. I don't want to make myself miserable. And that's another path that people take to make themselves miserable, is the ambition track, and they don't listen to their inner self. So listen to your inner self, leave the firm if you got to leave. Like Daryl said, a lot of the newer firms that have, women running them, have minorities running them, they value, the work-life balance a lot more. They value the person a lot more. We're really starting to learn. And those aren't the only people. The old white guys do too, but they don't necessarily fully understand all the time the things like the maternity leave and all that kind of stuff. So just, you need to find your spot, and there is a spot for you. There is a firm that matches your beliefs.
Yeah.
And if I can just, can I just say something about, we talk a lot about work-life balance. I wrote an article for this Canadian legal publication a few months ago on work-life integration. I think in today's day and age, we need to strive for integration more than balance, because unfortunately, no matter how great your firm is, no matter what boundaries you have, at the end of the day, particularly if you're a trial lawyer, you're going to have obligations to the court. You're going to have obligations to your client that can't be avoided. What we do in certainly on my team, but I think through my firm as a whole, is we have a work-life integration. And so what that means is, I'm going to call you. You're my associate. If I think of something at 12:30 on Saturday while I'm driving to the grocery store and I call you, if you don't answer my call or call me back, I actually get very agitated. I'll say to my wife after an hour, I called her an hour ago. Why didn't she call me back? But the trade-off is, in my firm, for example, and I do it as well, we just go and work, especially now in this era where in Canada, 80% of our court appearances are on Zoom. All of our discoveries, all of our mediations are on Zoom. So there's a tremendous flexibility now. And so, I'm going to go perhaps next year, because my wife is retiring this year because she's a teacher and doesn't have to keep working anymore because she was in a union, and will get a nice pension. I'm going to decamp to Florida where it's warm, because it's very cold up here in Canada in February, and dark too. So I'm going to go to Florida for a month, but I'm going to work full time. I'm not taking a day off. I'll still work. I'll keep my full schedule of discoveries and mediations and court appearances. But what I will do is I'll be doing it in a place where I'll be happier. And so I'll be able to do that. My staff will travel frequently to be with family or take sort of mini vacations without taking it as part of their allotted annual vacation. And they'll just say, well, I had an associate who went to work in Australia at her cousin's last year in November for the entire month. And she continued to work. She continued to settle files and deal with clients remotely. But she was able to do it there. And so I think, for me, I will leave the office in the middle of the day to go do personal errands because it's less busy. But then I'll stay up and answer emails till 11 o'clock at night. That's my choice. But there was a study recently in Canada that said that it arose out of COVID, and it said that the number one thing that people value in their job that gives them the most satisfaction was not money. It was autonomy over their time. Right. And so that's a way that as long as you have some autonomy over your time, that's where I talk about the work-life integration as opposed to the balance. But I do agree with Jolene. If you're in a firm that doesn't get it, go somewhere else.
Yeah, I love that term, work-life integration, because I think that is so true. And to follow up on your remarks, I think it's important for law students and young lawyers to realize that their goals, their ideals that they may have when they're in law school, when they first graduate, will likely change. What is important in the practice of year one is probably going to be very different from the practice of year 15, which I know for me, it definitely is. So with that, we only have a few minutes left. I don't see any open questions right now. If anyone has them, feel free, go ahead and ask. But otherwise, I'm going to ask that our speakers go ahead and close this series with the lessons that you both have learned that you think are important for our group of lawyers and students to know.
Yeah, I'll start. So I think the first thing to understand, and we kind of said some of these things earlier, which is one, absolutely, you are not alone. No matter what your situation is, whether you're going through depression, whether you feel like you're failing, whether you feel like you want to drop out, you're not alone. The second thing is, again, avoid the shoulds. Everyone's going to tell you what to do and how to do it, and it's the only way to do it. And that's not true. There's a million ways to live this life. And you'll land on your feet. Yeah, there might be some bumps. It's going to be okay. And there's mentors of every sort. There's mentors to help you get that perfect job. There's mentors to help you get out of law. There are mentors all across the board. And people just sometimes get so stuck in their rut, they forget to look around and see that there's actually people out there to help them. So I'd say those are my two main things to take away today.
So I have 3 lessons that I always, when I do these, when I do my talks as a keynote, I always end with the 3 lessons that I have learned over the years through my, not so much through the addiction, but going through the recovery and coming to the other side of it. And these things will, if you do them, I promise you, your mental health will be better. Your life will be better. Number 1, lose the ego and replace it with humility. As we said when we started tonight, we are as lawyers, and particularly as trial lawyers, we are type A personality. We have egos. You can't walk into a courtroom and do your job if you don't have a healthy ego. But leave it when you leave the courtroom. Save it for the courtroom. That ego it makes you, first of all, I realize in retrospect, it makes you an unbearable person to be around, which then makes things like your marriage more difficult to stay in. So, replace that ego with humility. Number 2, lose and this goes directly to what Jolene is saying about the should. Lose the envy. Lose the envy, replace it with gratitude. Stop worrying about what somebody else has or where they're at in their career or what they appear to have, their house, their car, forget it. It doesn't matter. You only need to compete with yourself and find your own happiness. Find the gratitude in what you have and go for the things that will make you have that gratitude, not things that you want because, your partner in the next office has it, or your friend at another firm has it, or your next door neighbor has it. Envy is like a cancer. It just eats you up. And by the way, I don't know about in the US, but I can tell you in Canada, lawyers have a remarkably high rate of personal bankruptcy, surprisingly high. And that's driven when I've done a lot of bankruptcy and insolvency work in my career. When I talk to my friends who are trustees, bankruptcy trustees, they all say the same thing with lawyers. It's just the envy. It's exactly that. They just had to get something because the guy in the next office had it. So lose that envy. And number three, again, this is exactly what Jolene was saying about, making that change. Lose the fear and get out of your comfort zone. We don't make changes. We don't make changes, whether it's getting out of a friendship, a marriage, a relationship, a job, a career, because we're afraid of what comes next or what will happen. You've got to lose that fear and take that leap, get out of your comfort zone. It's not going to be easy. I didn't want to stop being an addict because it was easy to continue being high all the time. The scary part was what happens when I don't have these drugs and I have to face reality, right? That's the problem. But once you do it, once you make those changes, I promise you, and I'll leave you with this one quick story. So shortly after, I ended up in a law partnership in 2010 and rebuilt a practice very, very quickly. And in the first 4 years, from 2010 to 2014, after my recovery, I was actually making more money than I'd ever made in my career. And regained all of my, the respect, like everything that I thought I had lost was back. But I was in a partnership. I had one partner, it was two of us, and we had a small firm with a couple of other lawyers and a large staff. And he and I had very different views on what was important. And he was one of these guys that just worked all the time, didn't care about his wife, didn't care about his kid. And it really led us to arguing, literally screaming matches on a daily basis. And by 2014, I had to make a decision. Do I leave behind, more money than I'd ever made in my entire career at that point, almost, 20, over 20 years of practice, or do I stay and deal with this, or do I take this leap and, take my lawyers and my staff from this partnership and my share of the files and go start over, which meant going out and taking out a large bank loan at a time when I had no other debt. Going out and starting sort of into the unknown without the security of a partnership. But I did it, and we ended up in litigation, and I had to pay my lawyer a lot of money. You don't realize as a litigation lawyer how much we really charge until you have to hire your own litigation lawyer. And we settled it in mediation, and it settled with me having to write him a check of all things. It didn't matter. I wrote that check and I said to my lawyer, this was the best money I've ever spent in my life. I have peace of mind. And then I built my firm over the next few years. And 5 years ago, the firm I'm at now came and bought my firm. And I have the greatest, the last 5 years have been the greatest time in my career, but also, the greatest time as a person, because I have all of these things and all of these lessons that I've learned. So don't be afraid to take that jump. And if you're going through any sort of trouble, don't be afraid to get help.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for your wisdom, for your advice, and for being here tonight. I know it's late in Canada where you are, Daryl. So with that, thank you to everyone who attended. And the video will be available on P.A.D's website probably in the next few weeks. Have a good night, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.